Just those things, you know, that happen that you run across in your lifetime. And, no, but Kenneth was telling a story about Daddy, and I don't know whether you remember it or not, about the three guys that robbed him that night. You know, and he caught one of them. Well, we happened to be down at the pool hall there playing some pool one night. We way back on the very back table, back at the end of the building. There's probably 25 pool tables up through there. And he said, "I'm gonna go up front and get a beer." I said, "Okay." And I didn't know what the deal was, you know. And so I was lining this shot up. You know, he'd always take me down to the pool hall. He'd say, "Well, I'm gonna get safe, and then you can have the rest of them." And he'd get just enough points where I couldn't beat him if I made the rest of the balls. And then, you know, he'd kind of goof off a little bit. So I never beat him in a game of pool in my life. But anyway, he went up to get a beer. And boy, I sat in this shot up, you know, and all that. And all of a sudden I heard this commotion. And looked up there just in time to see this guy go flying over the bar. And hit the floor behind the bar, you know. God, I took off running. I got up there and this was the second one out of the three that rolled it. And he saw him come in the door of the pool hall. He didn't say anything to me. He just said he's going to go get a beer, you know. And boy, the fight was on. But the blinds were open on the front of the pool hall. Had Venetian blinds there, and they were open. And this old boy's wife was sitting out in the car right in front of the pool hall, and she saw what happened. Well, she come through the door, and Daddy had on his traditional felt hat, you know, and all this other stuff. And she came through the door, and there was a big old thick Coke bottle sitting on the bar. And she picked this Coke bottle up. Before I could get to her, she brought that Coke bottle down across the back of his head. And it just shattered that Coke bottle, everything except that big old heavy piece that on the bottom. And it just shattered everything else, and that thing just fell off. And he turned around and backhanded that old gal. She just sat on the floor and slid right up against the wall on the other side, and that's where she stayed. And then he commenced to really work her husband over, you know. And but that was the second one, but he never caught the third one before he got killed. I always wished he had it, because I'd like to have seen that. You know, it was just one of those things. But yeah, well, he's done some good ones.
Yeah, he got in an argument with a driller one night when they shooting pool, and he always had a cigar in his mouth. Well, that driller grabbed him by the back of the head with one hand and shoved that cigar right down his throat. And he was choking to death. He couldn't get no air. That old driller was pounding away on him, boy, and the rig builders all stopped. They was watching the fight. But he finally coughed that cigar up, got enough wind. He finally whipped that driller, but that was a pretty good chore when you didn't have any wind to try to fight. That's kind of like that bear story I was telling you the other day where that bear fell off the cliff, you know. He was jumping up and down trying to get that cigar out of his throat. He's always was in trouble. I don't care what you do. I hurt him more than anybody, I guess, around, because I was so much faster. We had to stack all the skid boards. It was a truckload of them, and they'd back the truck up when we was done and go around the whole load with a winch line and roll it up over the tailboard of the truck, pull it up onto the headache bar, and haul all the boards at one time. But I was so much faster than he was, I'd throw it before he was ready. We were supposed to be in unison, supposed to throw them together, but I was always too fast. I'd mash his fingers.
I bet you did.
We went around, I was pulling, using horses, and them boards are 3 inches thick. They're 12 inches wide, and they're 24 feet long. Oak boards. And we had a hook about maybe 2.5 feet, or about 30 inches long. They'd get mashed down the sand. You just run that hook in under them, then you could pick them up and stack them. And the chain didn't have a real chain hook; it had a round hook on it. So you just flip the chain in the round hook and take off. You got all 3 boards at one time. Take 3 boards, laid down like your fingers for it to roll on. And you'd pull them up to the front and drop them off and go back to get the next. They'd just about be off the next board then. So all you would do is go back and forth from the front to the back of the rig. Taking them boards, and they'd roll them on 6-inch rollers. And on them 6-inch rollers, they'd put a 3/8 rod on the inside so you could hook it with your fingers and pull the rollers up, pick them up. They're 3 foot long. And them boards are heavy, boy, because that oak is heavy. recessing the nuts back into the end so the boards on the end wouldn't split out. And that takes a long time to do a whole truckload of them. But then we'd go get scaffold boards sometimes for the rig builders, and we'd put them on go to the lumber yard and look at all the lumber, pick out the best looking scaffold boards we could find, and we'd take 2 barrels, put a barrel on each end and put them up in the middle, put them up on them barrels, and 2 of us get in the middle and jump on it, see if we could break it. If it'd bow plumb down to the ground without breaking, that's a good scaffold board.
Yeah.
We just break them up, throw them in a pile, and lumber yard charge us whatever they want.
Yeah, you didn't want them
But
break.
that's the way we got them. Because when you go across there with a load of iron in your hand, you don't want the scaffold board breaking.
No. Well, tell us about your adventure with burning the neighbor's barn down. I think.
Oh, I started out with a few pigeons. At first I had a toilet, and I boarded the toilet hole up, and I put the toilet hole up on the side by the door so that they could go in and out there. And they'd fight a lot. Them male pigeons, they'd fight each other at that door. So I finally decided that we got a big tank top about 30 feet in diameter, steel top. And they put up 12-foot cross ties. As them cross ties they put in at the switching station where you switch the railroad tracks. They put 12-foot ties in there. But we put them up in a circle and set that on top. And we made a swinging door about 2/3 of a piece of plyboard where we could swing it up the hinges so we could open it when we got ready. But we put some few pigeons in there, and I put nests in there. I had orange crates for nests so they could nest. We left them in there about a month and fed them before we opened the door. When we opened the door, they'd fly all over town, and before long they'd bring other pigeons. They found out we had feed in there. They'd pretty soon I gathered I had 400 pigeons coming in now there every day. Man, they was multiplying like fierce, because they feed. I don't know how they talk to each other, but they do.
Yeah, that's had the old chicken wire around it, where you could watch them.
Sure.
But anyway, what I got a bright idea, it gets darker than the devil down there in Texas. And I decided I'd take one of them out and I'd tie a string onto his leg about that long. Then I'd tie a piece of baling wire about that long. And out on the end of the baling wire, I'd tie some old rag. And I'd soak it in kerosene. And I'd throw the pigeon in the air and he'd go out across the black night, and it'd be just like a star falling almost. But it looked pretty. But I decided, boy, that didn't last long enough. It burned out about the 3/4 way across the arch of the sky. So I loaded the next one up twice that much. When I put him in the air, boy, it's all he could do to gain altitude. He was really flipping his old wings. He flew down about a block and lit on top of a house. Well, I run down there to see where he's at for sure, and he sat down on the top of a shingle house like you have, just a tar paper shingle, and the tar paper shingles was burning when I got down there. So, man, I tell you, I was scared. That's the worst time I'd been scared. I wasn't scared about the burning their house down. I didn't think so much about that. I was scared about him skinning me alive. So I run and I hit that wall with my tennis shoe, and I had up so much speed I grabbed a hold of that overhang of that 2x6 on that rafter, and I just rolled right up over that thing onto the top of the roof with no ladder. I could have never done that unless I was scared.
I was scared to get.
And I scared that old pigeon off, and he flew across the street and landed on the tin building, so I let him sit there. But if I'd have burnt them people's house, I stomped that fire out, and they never did. They was in the house asleep. This is at night, almost 12 o'clock.
Good grief.
They was asleep, and they never did even know their roof had been on fire. I never did tell them.
How old were you?
I was 12, about 12 years old.
Yeah, I was just a little bit.
But I started caddying at the golf course at 12.
Yeah.
I'd got a job out there, and it was hard for a kid to get a job in them days because from
Especially the little kids.
15 and below was in C class, 15 to 19 was in B class, and 19 to 21 or 22 was Class A caddies.
Yeah.
So the Class A's went out first, then the B's, then the C's. Well, whenever I got a chance, I'd do my dead level best to do the best I could possibly do for the golfer. I'd polish his balls and shine his clubs and everything, and I'd watch that ball so I knew where it went. Then I'd ask him, could I be his regular caddy? Because that's the only way you could get out without having to go through the line was your regular.
Waiting on somebody to pick you.
So finally I got enough regulars to work steady. And I laughed at some of them. They had little pot bellies, and they'd shoot a hook or a slice one way or the other, and turn it a 45 to the green, and shoot it way out there, and then curve back in and come into the green, you know. It just their belly would move when they'd move, you know.
My only claim to fame on that golfing there, I was caddying out there when I was a kid. My only claim to fame, I caddied Ben Hogan before he got killed, before he died. But yeah, before that car wreck and all, you know, and he came back after that, but still he wasn't like he was before he had that car wreck. But I caddied for him, caddied 2 days for him. He won the Pro-Am tournament. He gave me $50, and my God, I had more money than the bank down there in this car, you know. I treated every kid in the neighborhood to ice cream and Cokes and stuff like that, you know. But that was, I graduated from there up to one of these little bicycle carts, you know. I had a push cart at first that had the bells on it where you sold ice cream, you know. You go down the street and sell ice cream. And doing pretty good, so they put me on a bicycle. Boy, I was in top form there with this bicycle, see. And that's when Kenneth was working. And he's doing pretty good there, so I'd go around and I'd make every kid in the neighborhood, and I'd give them all ice cream, and I'd keep a total of all this, see. And when Kenneth would come home, I'd go home and give him a list here, and he'd pay for it. So I had a pretty good racket go. I sold out every day, you know, and boy, they just couldn't understand why I was selling so much ice cream. Kenneth was buying for everybody.
We always waited for the hot tamale man because he was a colored man and he had hot tamales. We'd buy a dozen hot tamales. He'd have a cart he pushed and it had a fire in it. A hot tamale was hot, boy, I'll tell you.
They were.
I don't know whether they's made out of jackrabbit or what they's made out of. But he's there every day pushing that cart around town. We were just squatting then. Back in them days, you could just squat on a piece of land right outside of town. Nobody bothered you. You didn't have to buy it, just squat.
We had a big old place down there on Tom Green Street. We had 22 greyhounds. Now, and we used them for hunting. And you could take those greyhounds out now, and they'd run a rabbit. They'd run a rabbit completely into the ground, you know. But Daddy thought the world and all his greyhound. We got up there one morning, all 22 of them laying out there in the yard with all 4 legs sticking up there. One of them dead, just stiff as a board. And the old boy on the corner there across from him, we knew that he poisoned them because he'd always complaining about them, but we couldn't prove it. And Daddy went over and rapped on the door about 5 o'clock that morning. He called him everything he could think of besides white man, I think. And told him if he ever found out he'd poisoned those greyhounds, that he might as well get ready because he was in for the best whipping he ever had in his life, you know. But we never could prove it. You know, that's just one of those things you can't prove. But this old dog Rivet that you saw the pictures of, we went down there with a little bar down there next to about 2 blocks from the house. And he came in there one evening and he hadn't had anything to drink, so he wanted to go have a beer. So we decided we'd go down to the little old bar and have a beer and play a game of pool. Mother was fixing dinner. So we walked off down there and the old dog just laid down by the porch, you know. And we were back there shooting pool and he had his beer and I had a Coke. And boy, I was really walking tall on the cotton, you know. And the old boy stepped up on that porch and he kicked that dog, and that was just the wrong thing for him to do. Because when he opened the screen door, Daddy was waiting on him. He said, well, you was harsh enough to kick my dog. He said, I want to see if you can kick me too. And boy, the fight was on. You know, he'd fight over that dog. He'd fight over that dog faster than he'd fight over one of us kids, because we could pretty well take care of ourselves. That dog couldn't. And so the guy called the cops, and the cops came out there and broke it up, threw both of them in the car, and Daddy told him he wasn't going without his dog, so they picked the dog up and threw the dog in the car with him, took them all 3 to jail. So I went home. Mother said, where's your dad? And I said, well, him and Rabbits are in jail. So we had to go go down, she had to shut everything down from dinner, and we had to go down and get them out of jail, bail them out of jail, him and the old dog both. But this was just an everyday occurrence, you know, as far as,
Well, along in that time anyway, the ex-convicts had got out and they took over the taxi cabs and the police department.
yeah,
And the convicts was running the taxi cabs and the police department. And I'll tell you what, boy, they beat the tar out of him a few times with blackjacks.
yes,
They cut the blood vessel there in his head one time when they thought he'd been in jail. And they had me held over there because I was just young. And they thought him in that jail, and he was squirting blood out here about as far as my hand, right out of a vein in his head. And his shirt was all soaked in blood. And they just thought him in jail and left him. They didn't do nothing for him.
that's
He
it.
had had head tight.
That was a good old days too, you know. But there was one night he had an old '51 GMC pickup, and he had been out the Silver Saddle Bar on West 2nd Street. It was about the last place in town before you got out in the country, and it had been out the Silver Saddle there. Well, he left the Silver Saddle, instead of coming back into town, he started out west, out on the highway. Well, lo and behold, there was a large sloping ditch off the edge right-hand side of the road, and about 15 or 20 feet over on the other side of that ditch was a level spot, and then there was a barbed wire fence. And there was a car sitting over there, these people traveling, they were asleep all the way over against that fence. They must have been 50 feet off the highway.
She's over there, 200 feet to the fence.
And the next morning in the paper, it come out, there was a big headline in the paper, it says, "Couple splattered by eggs in a freak mishap." Now that was the headline. Well, it went on to explain how Daddy was drunk, and he crossed that median, and that's the only car within 25 miles of him that was moving. It wasn't moving, and he hit it right in the back end. Well, these people had a case of eggs up behind up over the back seat there in the window, you know. Well, when he hit that car, all these eggs broke and just covered them up with all these eggs, and that's where the headline came
Yeah,
up.
he
You know,
broke that whole
couple
case of
splattered
eggs
egg
over
freak mishap. You know, but that same old pickup, before he tore it up doing that, he had an old pit bulldog, and he thought the world and all that dog, about like Kenneth and Boogie here, about like old Rivets when he had Rivets. But mother came out one day, gonna go down to the store, go to town, do something, and that dog was laying on that pickup. She didn't see him, and she backed right across his chest with the right front wheel on that pickup, you know. And God, she thought she'd killed that dog just sure in the world. She was worried what she's gonna tell Daddy. Well, the old dog laid there for a few minutes, and then he got up and walked around the house and laid down out on the grass in the backyard there in the sunshine. Laid there all afternoon. It's probably 90, 95 degrees. He laid out there all afternoon. Soon as he heard that car come up with Daddy in it, and Daddy got out of the car, he did like Boogie. He jumped up and took off to the front. He was hopping and jumping and skipping around. Never a sign that he was run over by that truck. She never said a word, neither did I. We just let it go.
Yeah.
You know, but that was another time she was backing that truck out of the driveway, and there's a Ford coming along, Ford pickup. And right there, it had a tubing type thing on the back of it, a stake. You know, they used to have where you could put a stake in there. And it was made out of that 2-inch square tubing. And I don't know what happened, but he missed everything but that tubing, and he hit that tube. Put a scratch on that tubing about that long, and totally demolished the right front end of that Ford pickup. The front fender, the grill, the hood, and all on the right side was just completely demolished. And a scratch about that. So she never told Daddy about that one either, you know. But he bought a Ford pickup, a new Ford pickup, light blue, and never will forget it. He had it 2 days. He hadn't had anything to drink a week or two, you know, and I think he's looking for an excuse, but he hadn't had it for 2 days. And so I was going someplace before he came home, and so I took his pickup, and my brother-in-law at the time then, James Hub, old Don Carter, was with me, and we was going up 31st Street in Odessa, and it was icy and snowy and everything. And I told him, I said, boy, here's what I like to do, and I hit those brakes, spun that wheel, well, it went into a broadslide. And I hit a telephone post with the driver's door on that new pickup. Now, he'd had it 2 days. But it never broke a glass. It just had an imprint of that door, but it never broke glass in it any place, you know. And why, I don't know, I'll never understand how it didn't, but I drove it home and parked it in the driveway. Well, I got the living hell beat out of me. Daddy went on a drunk, and you know, I quit driving his Ford pickup, so I didn't do that anymore. Yeah. Yeah, oh, I'm telling you, it was piss.
We had a 38 Ford truck. We had 8 head of horses really at one time, and I'd drive one truck and he'd drive the other one. He had a 38 Dodge and a 38 Ford, but the doors wouldn't stay all closed on that dang Ford. You couldn't keep them closed. They was so loose. So he told me to fix it one day while he'd gone, so I fixed it. I took the cutting torch and cut the hinges in two, took the doors off.
Took the doors off.
Yeah. So the gal had give him another pony up north, about 60 miles, so we was going to go up there and get him. He let me drive, and that old Ford would run 100 miles an hour. That Ford truck would. It was high geared, and it would flat run. You had that much foot feed. I know.
Yeah.
And I must have been doing 70 when he had telling me to slow it down, because I looked over there, and he always carried a pocket full of matches.
The old kitchen matches.
Yeah, old kitchen matches. And I looked over there, and there's one after the other following each other out, and they'd come up like this and circle and go down the floorboard. It was blowing the matches out of his pocket, one right like he's playing follow the leader.
At a vacuum.
And we got up there, and that old gal wouldn't give us that pony. That old boy had, but she wouldn't give us that pony, so we made a trip for nothing. But boy, I blowed the matches out of him that time.
I'll tell you what, that old bird dog he had, old Rivet, he had a 2x10 for sideboards.
He
that old
always
truck.
stand on that thing.
And he'd always put 4 foot right up on top, all 4 feet up on top of that 2x10, and he'd stand like that, going down the road, those ears are flopping outside, you know, doing 40, 50 miles an hour going down the road. Well, the old man turned to go around the curve or something, that old dog just right straight out across the pasture, just rolling and tumbling, you know. He'd stop and go back and pick him up and get up there, get right back up on the sideboard. Here he go again, you know. He threw him off of that truck, more time than I care to remember, you know.
That's amazing.
Sunday was our day was our fun day. That was the day to go chase rabbits. Every Sunday, we'd go chase rabbits, whether we had a horse or not, even if we had one.
Yeah.
We had one old dog chase 4 rabbits down before he went into convulsion. He jumped off the truck. We had him on the truck after he chased 3 down. He was so stinking hot. We figured he better hold him down. But we'd ride along the road, and the jackrabbit jumped out of the barn. He jumped off the truck when he was going 45 miles an hour and caught that rabbit.
And it did out there.
And he went in convulsions out there in the field. And we had got out. I thought he'd dying. He loved to catch them rabbits.
Oh, he'd catch those rabbits, I'll tell you what. Those big old horses we talking about, he had 2 teams of Clydesdales. And not Clydesdale, Belgians, like Karen's over here. Big horses. And then he had 2 teams of gray, 2 matched teams of gray.
Them grays was pretty.
Yeah, and those big old Belgians, now, us kids, we'd get out there and we'd have to crawl up on a cross tie on the fence there to get on them. And we just sat up there and our legs just stick straight out because we wasn't long enough to wrap around them, you know. And we'd ride those old horses all day long, you know. But those grays, you could go out there and you could ride that gray as long as you was bareback. But you put a saddle on him and you couldn't sit on that gray. You get on him, he'd throw you on it with that saddle on him, you know. But they never
like
broke.
nothing around his
No,
belly,
never broke a ride the saddle, but you know, it's just
them grays are so pretty. I always wanted to polish their hooves in front, you know, and put the lacquer on them so they shine. Put a diamond in the front of them, you know.
Yeah, they were really pretty. That was really
That's
nice.
what my idea of making them dress as well. Or put some of that fancy harness on it like the Romans had.
Yeah. Carl had that old strip down. His 37 Ford strip down.
I bought that thing too.
Yeah, and it had 4 fenders. Didn't have a hood. Had 4 fenders and a radiator sticking up. Then a blank space over the engine, and then the windshield coming up. Well, just the top of the windshield, just cut it off right there and took all the body off. The only thing that was on there was the 4 seats and the windshield. I mean, the 4 fenders and the windshield and 2 bean seats, and that's all was on there. Wow. And back at the back, there wasn't even anything back, no trunk, nothing. It was just open behind the seat all the way to the back bunker. And so one night, Daddy come in, he decided he needed to borrow that. So Carl fetched him the keys, you know, and he got in, and him and old buddy his, and they took off someplace. So about 10:30, 11 o'clock, somewhere along there, and this is probably 6 o'clock in the afternoon. About 10:30, 11 o'clock, Daddy come back in the house, and there wasn't a place on him that wasn't torn or wasn't skint. His face was skinned, all his arms were skint, you know, and he was just, it looked like he'd been run through a meat grinder, you know. And he walked in there and he pitched those keys to Carl and he said, "Don't ever let me borrow that car again." You know, about like that. And Carl said, "Well, what's the matter?" He said, "Well," you know, he was still drunk. He had sobered up a little bit, but he was still about half drunk. And he said, "Well," he said, "we was driving down the street there," and said, his old buddy was driving. He was sitting there in the seat, and this 4 seat belts or anything, you know. And he said they'd done about 40 miles an hour, and said all of a sudden that old boy come to the intersection. He wanted to turn, so he turned left. He said, "I come out of that thing did like a bull out of a
He
chute."
lost it right there.
And he said, "When I hit that payment, all I did was just slide and roll on that payment." So he brought that car in and told Carl, "Don't ever let him borrow it again."
That's one of his tricks, boy, I'll tell you.
But Carl there, it was probably 6 or 8 months later, he had about 7 or 8 guys on the back of that car, and they was driving out in the country, and there wasn't a soul around. But there was an intersection out there, and there was an old man about 90 was coming to meet them on an angle. He was coming down one street, Carl was coming on the other. Only car within 5 miles of them, and they had a wreck, you know. And all you could see when Carl hit that car, Carl was the only one on it. He was sitting there holding on the steering wheel whenever he stopped sliding and everything else. And there was boys in every different direction off the back of the car, and the only one that got hurt, 2 of them went over the windshield, and the only one got hurt, he ran through a thorn bush and got a thorn in his little finger, and you thought he was killing, he was going to die.
It happened to be in a sandy corner.
Yeah, it was,
That old road was sandy over there.
Just,
And he slung all them kids off, and they didn't even know they was going to have a wreck. They were wrestling.
yeah, they was all fighting back
Carl
on
was
the
the
back.
one that knew that there was anybody coming.
We used to take and get old car hoods or ladders, anything we could get in the wintertime when it's icy. And we'd tie them on behind this car. And just as many kids as we could put on them without them falling off, you know, we'd take off. And he'd just going just fast as he could get going in that thing and on the ice and snow. And then he'd turn or something, you know. Well, of course, anybody fell off had to walk back town. They wouldn't let you back on. You'd have to walk back town. Sometimes we're 3 or 4 miles from town, you know. And my God, there might not be 2 people on there at the time we got back town. The rest of them scattered all over the country out there trying to get back to town, you know, because when that ladder or the hood or whatever it was we had behind that car hit the end of that rope after he turned, it just like a whip. Boy, and you could fling kids for 20, 25 feet out there across that, through bushes, mesquite bushes, anything. Barbed wire, they made do what was out there. You know?
They had a little low place out there, kind of like a bowl valley. And there's a windmill down there in the tank, and that's where the cows drink. And they had a wooden trough run out there with water in it out of the tank. And we parked that old Model A up on the side because it wouldn't start. We had to push it to get it started. And it had a spark advance and a gas advance on the steering wheel. Well, we come up out there. We were swimming in that tank, so we come up and started that old car, but we was all pushing on it, and we had it too much gas, and the thing started and run off and left us. So we were chasing it around that valley. It was on a slope, so the car was going around and around the valley till we finally caught it. By then we was thirsty. We didn't have nothing to drink, so we went down there, and them old cash slobbers was floating around on top of that wooden trough. We brushed them out of the way, and all them little wiggle tails down there about that long, we shooed them out of the way, and we drank water there.
Well, out there you drank what you could find, you know.
Never killed us. Never made
I used to shoot crows out there sometime when I was hunting. I'd shoot crows so I'd have something to eat. You ever eaten a crow? God, it's gross, but it's food, you know. We had, I had, after everybody left, I was the only one home there. We was out on the Andrews Highway there, and I had big pens out there, and I had 4 fox, I had 4 raccoons, and 4 hoot owls and a bobcat. yes, every night I'd go out there every night rabbit hunting. Now I'd kill 5, 6, 8 rabbits, you know, just how many ever I thought they'd eat, and I'd bring them back and throw them in those cages with them. So I was out there. I couldn't find anybody to go with me. Normally somebody's there, and I just couldn't find anybody this night to go with me. So I went out by myself. It was after dark when I come back in. And I got out of the pickup. I just had them laying in the back of the pickup. I just got out of the pickup and had the headlights on. I just took the keys out of my pocket and walked over in front of this bobcat's cage and sat down and knelt down on the ground and I unlocked the lock on that bobcat cage. Well, just about the time I unlocked that lock, I heard a rattlesnake. And I looked up, and he wasn't 2 feet from me. He was laying there coiled, and he was singing his song. And there I was on my knees, you know, and I'd twitch and he'd rattle, and I'd twitch and he'd rattle. It took me 45 minutes to get up in a half-standing position now, because I'd move a little bit and he'd rattle and I'd stop, and I'd move a little bit and he'd rattle and I'd stop, and it was like that way for 45 minutes. And the sweat was running off of me. I was just soaking wet. And so I finally got up where I thought if he was going to get me, he's going to get me in the rear because that's the only thing he's going to see. So I jumped. Well, I jumped and he struck, but he missed me. And I went over to pick up and I got that 12-gauge shotgun and shot that rattlesnake 4 times. But, you know, that's the closest I ever come to being bit by a rattlesnake. Once you ever hear it like that, you'll never forget that sound.
No, I
Never forget that sound.
You'll never forget it.
When he rattled, stop and see where he's at.
But anyway, this old bobcat now, we were living there, and everybody, this was later on, we had moved out there, you know, not during this episode with the rattlesnake, but later on we had moved out there and still had this bobcat and some more animals there. And so Daddy came in one afternoon, and he was about 3 sheets under the wind, you know, they'd been drinking pretty heavy. And he came in and he decided he's going to tame that bobcat. Well, he's just about as big as that dog, Gary, you know, and just meaner than 9 kinds of devil, you know. So I had a cage there that was probably all 6 foot wide, probably 14, 16 foot long, 5, 6 feet high, with a big little tree out in the middle of it to give this cat something to climb on and claw on, you know, and this and that. So he said he put on a pair of old heavy leather welding gloves and a big old heavy coat and pulled it down and took that cap like Kenneth got with the flaps on it and pulled it down and tied them under his chin here, you know. And he said, come out here and open the door and let me in. I said, okay.
He's gonna tame that bobcat.
So I went out there and I opened that door and he crawled in there with that old bobcat, and when he backed off about over the far corner over there and growled a little bit, snarled. So I slipped that lock back through that hasp, see. So I went in the house and I combed my hair, and changed my shirt, washed my face. I wanted to go to town anyway. So I went back out, and by the time I got back out there, that bobcat and him had bit in the center of that cage, and that bobcat had taken in about 4 or 5 fast rounds around that cage. And that coat was hanging off of him in shreds. His gloves was chewed up. His hat was kind of askew on his head, you know. And I didn't see any place then that wasn't scratched. His face, you know, ears, you know, everything was scratched. And he said, let me out of here. I said, no, I can't do that. I said, you got that cat mad now, and I said, I don't want that cat to get away. So they went another 2 or 3 rounds, and I just stood there and watched him and laughed, you know. And finally I felt sorry for him. So I went over there and I slipped the lock out of that hasp, and I had started my car and left my car door open. That's that old 50 Chevrolet convertible I drove up here to Alaska, and I opened my car door and started my car, and I slipped that lock out of that hasp, and I hit that car and didn't go home for 3 days. But I saw him down at the pool hall there on the 3rd day, and he had little thin scabs. There wasn't a square inch on him, but didn't have a scab on it, you know. Just all over his face, his ears.
That was his favorite habit. If we catch, whipping whoever he could catch.
Yeah, whipping whoever he could catch, you know. But I told him, I said, well, that pays you back for some of the things you've done to me, you know. But he said, I'm gonna get you one of these days. Fortunately, he never did, though. But that was one of my best episodes with him and that cat, because that cat took him around and around that ring, boy. But he would always pull something like that, you know. He didn't have any fear of anything, and he was a stout old devil. I've seen him take his cross ties and and he'd stand 2 cross ties up on end, 6 or 8 foot cross ties, just a normal cross tie. And I've seen him stand 2 of them up, put one on each shoulder and take off, walk up an embankment, throw them up the back of a truck, you know, and didn't think anything about it. He was just out of the bull, you know.
He was a worker.
But he'd come in there and he'd go in there and he'd get in the bathtub, full of the bathtub, just high as he could get it, you know, with water. And all of a sudden you'd hear this, where he'd slide down in
We
the
had
water
one
under
of
that
them
water.
oblong galvanized tubs, you know.
It just things like that, you know. The guy was crazy.
What was your mom like?
Huh? Well, mother, she was.
Tougher than a boot.
Yeah, she was tough. And Daddy'd come in sometimes and go to bed, and she'd go in there and wake him up so she could argue with him, you know. Just stuff like that. But she didn't back up from him any. I'll guarantee you, I never saw her back up from anybody. But you know, all of us kids, she's as good as she could be to us kids. And
He knocked her down 10 times one night, and she'd get back up and say, "You can't do that again."
Can't do that again. Yeah, it'd
She
knock her
knew
down
dang
again.
well he could.
It'd knock her down again.
He
She'd
ended
get up
up
and say, "You
great.
can't do that
He'd
again."
Lower the boom on
You
her
know?
again.
Well, that's one thing that I guess that was the one thing that that was the final blow between he and I, because this happened a little bit before this Bobcat
But
incident
she'd
when I
dare
lost him
him,
in the
though,
curb.
that's the problem.
But he came in one afternoon. He was a little rambunctious, and he hit her a couple times. And I told him, I said, "No." I said, "You're not gonna hit her anymore as long as I'm here." He said, "Well, son," he said, "I'm gonna tell you right now." He said, "You said him talk to me like a man. You're gonna take a whipping like a man." Boy, he laid it into me. And so I told him, I said, "I'm gonna get you back one of these days, somewhere, somehow." And then I put him in that Bobcat cage. That was my revenge. So after that, we didn't have any more problems, you know. But Carl, when Carl come back from Korea, you know, him and Daddy got in an argument there, and Carl was 16 months on the front line in Korea. And so he come back from Korea, and just old, tall, lanky kid, you know, didn't weigh 130 pounds soaking wet. And Daddy told him one night, he said, "Well," he said, "you know, it's been a long time since I whipped you." He said, "I think it's about time." And Carl backed up against the wall over in the corner, and he said, "Let me tell you just one time, old man, I'm just going to tell you once." He said, "I was taught how to kill a man with my bare hand," and he said, "By God, I come back from Korea." He said, "So don't mess with me." Daddy said, "Well, if you feel that way about it, then I won't." That's all he ever said. He never said another word. But he was.
Oh, you know, everybody has their troubles.
Yeah.
And Mother had a little boyfriend she'd found somewhere. Of course, my dad found out about it. We took her letters and buried them. And that boyfriend finally come to town one time, and he found out who he was, and he got him in the car. They was going to go outside of town and fight. They was drinking. Well, they got out there where them little sand dunes was in the north, and they got out to fight, and the old boy decided he didn't want to fight. He just was going to run off, so he taken off across the pasture. Dad jumped in the car and was going to run over him. So he taken after him in the car, and he almost caught him when he hit his hand dune and got high centered and couldn't. So he just reached over in the pocket, and he had a .38 pistol in there, and he got out and see if he could hit him, and he fired all 6 shots in there. He said, "I never did hit him, but every time I fired, he'd pick up speed." That's the last he ever seen of him.
They never came back.
He never come back for any more.
Yeah, it's like the Wild West.
Yeah.
That's the way they done it down there. We ended up towards north and worked in them trucks, and we passed this tourist court. And there they didn't have no running water. They had dish pans, you know, they washed the dishes in. This old gal went outside to dump her dish pan out of the driveway. And just as she went outside, a big gust of wind come along. She just had on a kimono, and it blowed her right straight up over her head, and she didn't have a stitch on it. And of course, we just right by the side of her, so we just sat out on the air hard. I bet she felt bad. I bet she felt. We passed another place where the two-holer was just off the road, just about 50 feet. And there was a gal about like Jane or Debbie sitting in there on a two-holer, and she was waving at us.
Yeah.
We went by, no door was on it.
Ew.
Things like that went on all continually. It never quit.
We had the house we slept in out behind the big house. Us 3 boys slept out there. and it looked right across into these other people's bedroom, and it wasn't any further than here to that other wall in there between houses, you know, that's how close together they were. And it looked right across their bed, right in the bathroom, you know.
Right.
Well, the first time there was some girls living there, and boy, they liked to put on a show, and we liked to watch them, you know, but they never would let me watch because they said I was too little. Kenneth and Carl wouldn't. They wouldn't let me watch.
He was a little bitty guy, we wouldn't let him watch that.
But anyway, after they left, this man and woman moved in there. Well, there we kept our eye on the window, you know, see what had happened there after they moved in. And one night they were in there in bed, boy, they were just having a good time, you know. And all of a sudden she jumped up out of the bed just stark naked and took off down through the house. Well, he jumped out of the bed stark naked and he was after her. Well, she run right out the front door of the house, and their car was sitting out there. And he was right behind her, and when he went back by that car, he just reached over and grabbed the radio antenna off the fender and just broke it completely off when he come by. And every time he'd get close to her, he'd swing that radio antenna. And he dipped her a couple of times. Boy, she had some big old welts. You could see them across her rear end. And he hit her with that radio antenna 2 or 3 times before they ran around that car out there. Both of them just naked as jaybird. Around that car. And then back in the house. And it wasn't 15 minutes later, they'd back in their bed having another good time. You know, that's the kind
had
of...
to straighten her out a
Yeah.
little.
Yeah.
My word.
Oh, it was... It was something else. We had some boys over there, the Irvin boys, Irvin Plumbing Company. They own a plumbing company there now in Odessa, and been there for years and years. And 4 or 5 of these are big old boys, you know, and all of their friends, they all rode these big Indian motorcycles. That's back when Indian was popular rather than Harley Davidson. And they rode these big Indian motorcycles, and they played baseball on them. They had a lot over there, a vacant lot. Well, the batter would have to hit the ball. The fielders, all the outfielders, were on motorcycles, and the basemen were on motorcycles. The pitcher and the batter was the only 2 that wasn't on motorcycles. Well, the pitcher would pitch the ball, the old boy would hit it and have to go and crank his motorcycle, and then here he went, you know. And these guys out there in the field, rather than take a chance on throwing that ball to the baseman, here they'd come wide open, you know. And these guys tore up more motorcycles and had more broken bones than anybody you ever imagined, because they just run over one another, you know. And this was their famous sport that they did every summer.
Famous sport.
You know, and I never will forget that because these guys are crazy, you know. But that was just the way things went back there, you know. And
He used to sit on we had a ballpark not too far from our house, about what, 3 or 4 blocks.
down about 3 blocks down over on Muskin.
I sat on the back fence, because when they knocked the ball over the back fence, they'd come to get them, but I'd jump down and grab the balls, and I know where all the gopher holes was. I'd stick them in the gopher hole till the ball game was over.
Go around all the way to that baseball that way.
I had plenty of baseball. That's where they pulled my pants off, and I had to go home without any pants. Some guys did.
We had a big old...
Girls all set up on the back of the balcony. There wasn't no back in it, just the top seat. And the floodlight was right out back where you come in the entrance. That's where they caught me, right on that floodlight. They pulled my pants off so all them gals up there could see
Why'd
me.
they do that?
They's ornery kids. There's 6 of them run together.
Well, what caused them to pick on you?
They pick on everybody.
They pick
It wasn't
on
just him.
everybody.
Oh, okay.
The guy that had the soda pop stand, they'd whip him, take over his stand, and sell the soda pop.
You take the money. Yeah.
One of them had fell off the show 2 stories, and he had a cast on his arm, and he used that for a billy club.
Oh, it was weird, boy. I'll tell you what, we had some times.
Heck, I couldn't do nothing about it. They tried to stop me on my horse, and I'd kick that old horse and run right over the top of him once. They'd take you down off, take your horse, they'd take anything.
Some of these guys, boy, it didn't make any difference.
Just I was a little gang, just
You know.
like.
But yeah, that old ballpark though, we used to make big old yo-yos, 6, 7 inches in diameter, and get up there on top of that ballpark. We'd use those, play with those yo-yos. You know, we had the biggest yo-yos in town, stuff like this. You know, just they'd bring those whole donkeys in there for the donkey baseball games. They'd bring them in day ahead of time so they could
Donkey
rest up and
baseball.
graze, you know, and all this other stuff, and so they'd be ready for the baseball game. We'd go out there and ride those stupid donkeys all night long, and they never had any injury for the baseball game. They stand over there asleep on sidelines, you know, and they couldn't figure out what was the matter with the donkeys. But There's 10 or 12 of us. We'd go down and ride those stupid donkeys all night long, and we'd slip out of the house after everybody went to
Yeah,
bed.
you wanna hear some language, you get a Negro baseball donkey game,
Yeah.
and them old gals would holler at them old boys, you better get around there, you better hit that ball, or you just might as well not come home.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, hey, they had some.
You
they
ain't
had
gonna
some
get
wild
nothing.
times. They had some wild time.
And I used to laugh at them. I laughed at them colors when they had them baseball games. It was more fun than a barrel of monkeys.
These two twin boys that lived next door to Ronald and Donald, their mother kept a half-inch cotton rope in a bucket of water, and that's what she used to whip them with. It was wet all the time, and that's what she used to whip them with. And I'll guarantee you, it would raise a welt a half-inch off your backside. And she came out one day, and they had a clothesline out there, and there they were facing one another across this clothesline, and they were peeing over the clothesline, peeing right on one another, And so she took them both and whipped both of them with that wet cotton rope, and it wasn't 15 minutes they was out there doing the
They
same
had both
thing.
just like Ronald and Donald.
Yeah, it's just stuff like that. We never.
And their sister was about 6 foot tall, and she always hit them on the head with the broom.
She was Naomi, and
was-
boy, I'll tell
She
you,
whipped them with the broom all the time.
whipped them with a broom.
I'd be seen her many a time come out of that tent with that cotton picking broom and swinging it, and they were running.
But even today, there's one girl that lived there on the street with us, and her name was Jean Cook, and she lived between us and Ronald and Donald Terrace, and she was one of her mother and dad tried to keep her pure, because they wouldn't let her out to associate with the Whatleys and have all the fun, because, and she would just cry because she couldn't come out and play with us, And today, she lives in Midland, and I can go down to Helen's house and get Carl and them over there, and Jean Cook will come over from Midland, and she will stay there all night if she.
Well, I've been just about everything the world done to me, shot at, beat up, and everything else, but I think the most embarrassing thing in my whole stinking life was a Cobble School in Big Spring, Texas. We had a class a first aid class on what to do for something if they fainted or if they had a heart attack or whatever they might have, and they chose me for the guinea pig. So we had right up from Grandpa's place, there was a kid named Hollingsworth, and he had a big mouth and a big laughter, and they had all us kids in school was gathered around me in a circle, and the teacher was there, and she was showing how to give a pump you on your back, in your belly and all, and give you so you could get more oxygen. Well, they had me rolled over on my back, and they was mashing on me, and boy, I let one of the biggest farts you ever heard in your life. Of course, the Hollingsworth, he ha 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 ha, and they all went to laughing. And I looked up at the teacher, and her face was red as red could be, and I just hid mine. I felt about as big as a mouse at that time. And talk about being embarrassed when you're a kid. You don't know how to fight your battles in it all. So I just had to take it. But that sure was an embarrassing part of my life. That one incident.
We used to go to the movie 3 or 4 at a time on Saturday afternoon. Watch the Lone Ranger,
Yeah.
Buck Rogers, or whatever that happened to be the serial for that week. And we'd always try to get behind 2 elderly ladies or something like this, Well, invariably somebody had to pass a little gas, And it was no small thing. They made a major production out of it, where it just literally, shook the seats and stuff like it. And whenever this happened, somebody would lean up to the ladies in front and say, "Ma'am, if you don't quit that, you're going to have to leave." Well, of course, everybody around, began to laugh, and we'd run more women out of movies like this because they'd always just turn beet red and jump up and take off down the aisle, But we used to take football games. We'd take baling wire, and we'd cut little pieces about 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, and we'd bend them like staple. And then we'd get big rubber bands. And we'd take these to the football games with us. When somebody stood up in front of us, we'd set them down. Because you hit them with one of those baling wires, and you're going to bring blood. Now, regardless of what happened, you're going to bring some blood. And we'd have, 6 or 8 or 10 people bleeding around there, and nobody knew where it's coming from. Because we'd be kind of spaced out.
Snipers are fantastic.
Yeah. And, it wasn't anything just to rip somebody's arm all the way down if one of those things hit them.
I like to go to the.
We were mean little devils. Yeah.
I like to go to the cowboy shows in the covered wagon because I'd get right on the front seat so the wagon could run over me.
Yeah, and
that wagon would come right at you and run right over the top of you. Look like.
And you'd stand there and you'd shoot with them.
Oh, Daddy took me to one of them Tom Mix shows, and man, he had a couple of gangsters. He's a fighting, and he was really fighting. And I jumped up in the middle of the seat, and I was a swinging and a shouting and a hollering. Boy, he set me down. He said, "I ain't never going to show you again, never." I was living it completely. I was helping Tom Mix.
We was in there one day, and it was a show about fox hunting, and showed all these people together, and the hounds going out across there, and all of a sudden there goes the fox, and all the hounds break into the baying and all this, and somebody stood up and said, "There goes that little red bastard, get him." And this was a common thing for any of the shows, something like you never told. You never knew what was coming out of anybody's mouth at the picture show, and just things like that, boy, it was crazy. We'd get popcorn.
Picture show was in back in them days.
Yeah, we'd get popcorn, dump it off the balcony on people down below. Butter and popcorn, and it didn't make a difference. We didn't care.
You didn't get to go to town very often, so you got to have a little fun.
Yeah, it was. We'd go to town. Maybe Saturday, maybe Sunday, just depends.
Maybe sometime 2 or 3 weeks.
And it's just But every kid, we had 22 kids on our block. And every kid liked to go to Whatley's house because you never knew what was going on. There was always something, We had the big barn out there. We were the only one that had a big barn. We had horses and chickens and, goats and everything in the world out there. And when it rained, the water'd back up there.
Oh,
And so we were going to get our report card one morning. We were all dressed up to the nines, We had on our best overalls and had clean socks on, and we was ready to go, And went outside and I saw this egg floating around the water, so I picked it up and hurled it over the barn. Well, I heard it hit something on the other side. And I thought, boy, I walked the devil out of that post on the other side, and a few minutes later, my sister Jane come around there, and she had rotten egg just running down. I hit her right on top of the head with that rotten egg, and all down over, in her hair, down over her dress. You talk about a whipping. Boy, I got one to fare thee well, but I got her. I nailed her to the cross for that one, but boy, it was, we had rotten eggs floating around all the time, and just we had old goats and stuff. We had an old goat, old George. You could take him out there, and as long as you didn't tease him or anything, you could walk over the fence.
I had 40 goats there in Odessa.
He'd put his head under you and pick you up and raise you up on top of that fence, and it's nice. But Carl was over there one day, a couple of his buddies, and they was aggravating old George. He had put a good size set of horns on him come out, And old Gail Green was standing there, and he'd been aggravating that old goat. And we had our barn had 1 by 6s and 1 by 8s and 1 by 10s on it. That's what the wall, this vertical stuff, and that's what the wall was made of. And old Gail Green, he wasn't big as a minute anyway. And he was standing there leaning up against one of those 1 by 10s. And he looked up just in time to see George hit him. But he had a full head of steam, that old goat did. But he didn't forget. And he caught, and his horn just went around old Gale like this, right into that wall. And him and goat and everything went all the way through that board, and on the other side. And like killed old Gale. Old George got up, shook his head, turned around, loped off across the barnyard.
Yeah, big enough for anything.
Yeah, but
Fay Rouse, when I was going with Fay Nona, Gail Green come up there and he'd say he traded legs with the Kildee, and the Kildee got cheated.
Yeah. Trade legs with Kildee and threw the butt to boot.
Didn't have a leg as half as thick as my finger.
Yeah. Kildee's little skinny bird didn't have any rear end at all. He'd always, traded legs with the Kildee and threw in the butt to boot. That was a normal saying, But,
He wasn't big as a bit.
you know, but, yeah, I went to, when I started to school, of course, all the other kids going to school, we'd walk to school in the morning, walk home for lunch, and walk back after lunch, and come home in the afternoon, you know. And we had this big city well house over there, about right across from us, standing out there in the pasture. Well, that's the only thing out there. Wasn't any trees around it or anything, you know.
There wasn't nothing there.
And so I went to school that first morning. I come home lunch, and I thought I was the smartest guy in the world. I didn't need to go back to school, you know. So we started back for lunch, and I just stepped out of line. I was always last one line because I was the littlest. And I just stepped out of line over there by the well house, and I stayed over at that well house all afternoon. God, it must have been 130 degrees out there. It seemed like it anyway. And Mother could see me over there. You know, she'd come out, and I'd notice that she could see me. And I didn't think anything about it. So, boy, they come back to school that afternoon. I was over there thirsty. You know, she'd come out, and she'd have a glass of ice water or a glass of tea in her hand. She'd stand out there and drink it. You know, and I was just dying for a drink of water, you know. And she'd stand out there and drink it in front of me, kind of laugh, shake the ice a little bit, and I could hear it clinking in the glass, you know. But I wasn't about to leave, you know. I wasn't about to get. So they come back to school that afternoon. I fell right back in the line, you know. And I got back over, and God, you talk about a whipping. Now I got it. And next morning, I was glad to go to school. I didn't think I'd near as smart as I thought I was the next morning. But you know, and old lady Booster Bomb there. I went in and I sat down in class, and she started going down through the roll, and she said, "Oh my God," she said, "I hope you're the last of the Whatleys." I said, "Well, I am." And she said, "Thank God for that." She said, "I started with Kenneth, and I had every one of them in between." And she said, "I'm glad you're the last one, because I don't think I could know another one." You know. But when I right my senior year in high school, we went out to FFA barn there and got a cow. And this is about 2 months before graduation. We got this cow. And we took her up to school there. And it wasn't very far to the barn, so we just let her up there, you know. And took her up to the school, and we took her shirts off and wrapped our shirts around her hoofs so they couldn't hear her, you know, walking down the hall, those marble halls. So we took that cow and let her down there and put her in the principal's office, and we took her shirts off her feet and all that. And I don't think that cow had been to the bathroom in 3 months, you know, but she did that night. There was manure on the ceilings, the light fixtures, the plants, the desk. Every paper in there was covered and just blotched. And the chairs, there was not a spot in there over 6 inches square that didn't have cow manure on it. Now, the walls, ceilings, and the whole 9 yards. Well, we almost bought the farm on that one. If they'd have caught us on that, we'd have never got our diploma. He come on the loudspeaker, and he said, if I ever find out, and I think he had his suspicions because he was questioning everybody about us. And I think he had a suspicion, but he never could prove it. Boy, we didn't say a word. We didn't tell anybody, you know. But we happened to get our diplomas first. And I don't know whether they found out after that or not, but boy, I wasn't worried about it because I'd gone then. I wasn't too worried about it then. But there's stuff like that, you know. It was good, clean fun. It wasn't too clean that day, but normally, you know, we didn't get in trouble. We'd Halloween, we'd go out and we'd steal watermelons, or we'd turn outhouses over. We'd put outhouses up on top of people's barns and stuff like this, you know. But we never caused any problem. We never maliciously tore up anything. We might move it, but we never tore it up, you know. And we had the cops chasing us one Halloween night there. Boy, we come around the corner, big old dumpster sitting there. And here they come, boy, in that car. And we did that night. We pulled that dumpster out in that alley. And when they come around the corner of that thing, and they hit that dumpster, knocked the front end out from under the car. But, you know, that's really the only time we ever really tore up anything. But
and then you didn't actually do it.
no, the trash can did it. We couldn't help it if it rolled out there in front of them, you know.
They wouldn't have been going so
Yeah.
fast.
But you know, shoot, it was an everyday occurrence where you got something was happening all the time, you know.
If you were so nice, how come that teacher was glad you were the last one?
Well, she didn't want another Whatley because she had started with him, and that was enough. And then Helen, and then Carl, and then Dorothy, and then Jane, and then
What'd you
me.
do
And
to
she
her?
said, "Huh?
What'd you guys do to her?
Well, you never paid attention. You was always disrupting the class. stress, you know, just things
It
like
looked pretty outside, you didn't wanna study for
Yeah.
one thing.
Yeah, you know,
You gotta be outside.
we used to try to sneak out of class.
You know, they
all
had
the
a big wreck there in Odessa, and I had to go over to see it. So they told me that one of them fast freight, we had fast freights that would come through there, it didn't slow down.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they was rolling, and them arms had come down, well, this old boy drove through them arms with drill pipe on a pole trailer behind the truck, and that train would hit that thing right in the middle. And it just shot them pipes up, and they just went right in through the houses, down the line of the railroad track, just like spaghetti. They just stuck endo right in through them houses. So I had to go see that.
Yeah.
Because it did look strange.
Even though you're supposed to be in school.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
that drill
You know,
pipe,
school don't matter, you gotta go see them things.
that drill pipe, you know, was half-inch thick wall. It was some heavy stuff,
You
boy.
could
It,
kill
you know.
people.
But that wrecked the train and everything
One day
else.
I was with Daddy, and I was sitting in the middle, and Daddy was driving, and Grandpa was on the other side of me there. And we driving. Daddy hadn't been drinking that day, thank the Lord. Yeah, or maybe he should have been drinking. Maybe we would have been, you know. But anyway, the arm came down on this railroad track, and he wasn't thinking. We was talking. He just pulled out around that arm, and just started across the track and heard this train whistle. Looked up, and there come that headlight down the track. He was running about 70 miles an hour. God, he whipped that wheel to the right, and we were the two tracks side by side, and we were straddling one rail, the outside rail next to where the train was, and we was on those cross ties, bumping along there, and that train was shooting by us 70 miles an hour there. Well, he wasn't that far from Daddy's doors, you know. And I looked over at Grandpa, and his hand was just white when he's holding on to the door. I couldn't go any place.
No.
I think I wet my pants the best I remember. But scared.
Them trains roll, boy.
God, oh
Man.
yeah. We had out about 6 miles west of Odessa, there was a pumping station out there or something, and they used to have tank cars out there. And so one day, I don't know what happened, but 6 of those tank cars broke loose, and it was all downhill, right into downtown Odessa. See, and they had this old switch engine down there, and of course those trains. Those cars, by golly, they were picking up speed because they were loaded. They were picking up speed coming down there. And I'll bet they was doing 65, 70 miles an hour when they hit the city limits of Odessa. And the only thing they could do, they'd run that switch engine out on that track. And now you talk about a wreck. That was a wreck. God, there was stuff all over. There was all over everything. But it knocked that switch engine completely off of those tracks. And it derailed all the cars, and they all turned over. But you know, it would probably kill somebody, you know, because you know people don't think of things like that.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, it's just, and on the other side of town coming in now, Odessa is flat. Just you know, it's very flat. And there was some cars down out there one night, and they had some hellacious rains back up north. They're up around Andrews and back north of Midland and up in that part of the country. And there was 9 cars sitting there on the siding there on the east side of Odessa. And there was a wall of water came down one of those little hills there. And they said a wall of water about 3 foot high coming down from those rains and knocked every one of those cars off the railroad track. And this was flat ground, just virtually flat ground out there, you know. But that's how much power that rain and that water, you know, raining up where you got just a slight
You almost sink in the ground, it just rolled across.
it rains so fast it doesn't have time to absorb. It just you know, it just runs, and it was just like a
All
3
them
foot wall.
thunderstorms, I love
You know.
it.
Wow.
But you know, my dad and my granddad over there, granddad over at Monahans, he was head of the Monahans division over there, and I was there.
This was on Grandma's.
Yeah, it's on Mother's
Mr.
Day.
Fall.
Mother's
Fall,
Daddy.
his name.
And he was in charge of the T&P Railroad over at Monahans. And one night I was over there, and there was a train coming down the track there, and boy, they were moving back in, you know. And this train sitting on siding, waiting on them. Well, I forgot to throw the switch. And that old boy, that train hit that siding, and the other one, they were head on, you know, meeting. And when that train coming off that side, he almost derailed there, you know. But that engine wasn't setting, 100 feet back from the siding, just got in there as close as he could so he could pull out, And when those two engines hit, the two old boys sitting there in the train that saw it coming, they tried to jump and cut both of them in half. The outside of their body was on the outside, the top of their bodies on the outside, and the legs and from about the waist down was on the inside. It just cut them in two. But it welded those trains, the heat off those boilers and stuff, welded that metal together. And I was over there, and this was about 69, I think. No, 59. No, it wasn't that. 49, I guess it was. 49, I was about 14 years old. 49, 12, 14, something like that. And so I went out there with him, and he had to take a cut torch and cut those trains apart so that they could get the rest of those bodies out there and be able to pick them up and get all the rest. But boy, it shut that line down there for several days, But that was a heck of a dangest train wreck I ever saw. But then on out of Penwell, you come on between Monaghan and Odessa, out there was Penwell.
Penwell, I was trying to think of that.
And it came down this track came down and made this long S turn. It came down and went across over the highway, I guess it was. It had a bridge there, went over the highway, and then there was a flat stretch, and then it started another S curve and cut back up, see. And one day an old boy come back on that train, and I guess he had building up, he had a head of steam built up, boy, because that train blew up. And that boiler, there wasn't anything, the only thing left on that train was just the running gear, just the wheels and the bottom of the engine. The boiler was about 250 feet out across the pasture there. They never found anything of the engineer and the fireman, But you don't realize how much power those steam engines have until something like that, until you see something like that, It was absolutely devastating,
Me and Sonny Nelson was working. I try to remember what that town was, that little stop was, Penwell.
Penwell, yeah.
But in Penwell, they had poison gas. They used to put, back whenever I was real little, it used to roll across like a cloud, and if you got in it, it poisoned you.
Yeah.
You died.
Swamp gas.
It'd come out of them tanks, because me and Sonny Nelson was roused about it, so what we'd do, we'd get a water can full of beer, and we'd go out there and we'd work like a dirty dog till noon, and we'd pump them tanks out. You gotta take the door off the side of the tank, and one of you has to go in there. You set the pump away out here with the long hose. You go in that tank and you take a broom. It's just like a squeegee, with a wide board on the front of it, and you sweep the bottom of that tank and loosen all that sludge up, and you pump it out into a pit out there. So one of you go in, because you gotta hold your breath. You don't breathe while you're in there, and the other one stays on the outside in case you get a whiff of that gas, so you got to go in there and get him. So that's what we'd do. I'd go in, and then he'd go in, and I'd go in, and he'd go in. But we'd rake the thing, we'd get it raked down and all dressed up by noon, then we'd sit down all evening and drink beer because it's too hot to work. Of course, old Harold, Harold Gwynn's, what was Sonny's brother-in-law, Harold, he's married to Gwynn.
Yeah, I don't know what his name is.
Harold, what the heck was it? Anyway, he had a farm down, pasture down south. And he'd charge for 6 men, and there's only 2 of us working. And he got a kickback to the superintendent of the oil field. Down in the oil field, first thing you learn is you can't buy nothing with money.
It's a barter system.
You buy it with women or whiskey. Only 2 ways you can buy down there. And I always had a case of whiskey in my truck. So I bought scrap iron with whiskey.
We used to go down Crane. He was talking about that gravel. We used to go down Crane, and I'd ride down there with him sometime. He had this big old flatbed truck, and we'd go down on McElroy Ranch down there and steal gravel.
Yeah, get gravel out of creek bed.
Well, it was real funny because old Elmer Kelton, who is a Western writer author, pretty well known Western writer author, he lived in San Angelo, and so he would. One day Sharon had a book so I helped her take some books out there, several boxes of books, and set them up. And she said, well, why don't you stay out there with me, because I'm not going to be here but a couple hours, you know. And I said, okay. So I thought, well, I'll just stay out there and help her, you know, with this book fair. And so Elmer Kelton was there, and he's this Western writer out of San Antonio. And he's got some good books, you know. So if you ever see him and you like a Western, you know, it's a light-humored Western. And if you like a Western, he's a pretty good writer. So anyway, I got to talking to him. And his dad was the foreman of this McElroy Ranch when we were going down there and stealing the gravel. He was raised on that ranch down there. And some of the stories that we swapped all this time, you know. But he's just a real nice old boy. But, you know, you never know who you're going to run across and where you're going to run across them, you know, because it's all kind. And he was just a very pleasurable fellow, you know. He was as nice as he could be.
That was a big ranch, and there wasn't nothing. The road went in somewhere over there.
Yeah.
They just had a cattle guard on it, so I'd go in the cattle guard, and then I'd cut down to the left and go into that creek. But they started drilling the derrick right in the middle of my road, so I'd have to go around it. But they hit something down in the ground, either a meteorite or something down deep in the ground, and they couldn't drill through it. They stayed there for months trying to drill through that thing.
Never could get it done.
And it was so hard they couldn't drill through it. They finally abandoned it and left it. I don't know what they hit.
They wore out
I don't know what
bit.
they don't give you any information, you know, them oil companies. They hit something, or if they hit oil, they won't tell nobody. That's their secret.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they hit, but I'd get in that little creek bed and I'd park the truck where the low side of the truck would be down in the creek bed and the other would be up on the bank. I'd load this side, then it'd drive it out and turn it around and get the other side down in there and load it with a number 2 scoop. I'd put 4 or 5 yards in there, and then we'd head home.
He'd load that. I had a little long handle spade, you know. I couldn't, about 2 teaspoons, about all it hold, you know.
Man,
But he'd set him a pace on that truck, and I'll tell you, he'd never stop. Once he got started, he wouldn't stop till he got that side full. He would sit there and work.
Sweat rolling
Yeah,
off of me.
I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he worked like that.
Boy, you worked in them days,
You know,
didn't monkey
But
around.
we were coming back down there one day, and we were tooting along there about 55, 60 miles an hour, something like that, and looked up, and here come an old boy to meet us. And he had 2 wheels on the pavement, 2 wheels off.
Wheels off on the shoulder.
And he was running probably 90 miles an hour, you know. And so, boy, we just pulled over. Kenneth just pulled
I
over. We
pulled off
stopped.
on the gravel on the other side, and I was watching him. Right straight into him. He was coming down the road, and I was on one side, and he was on the. He was watching me.
Yeah.
And just as he got right even with me, he just turned the wheel.
He never slowed down, never hit any brake.
He turned the wheel, and he rolled right across the road behind us. He rolled about 5 times to the fence on the other side. And of course, I would take me a little while to break down and stop, and I backed up, and I was going to go back down there. Well, I backed up and stopped, and I had to be Carl and Richard and me. And I said, let's just sit here a minute and see what happens. So he was up straddle of that barbed wire fence. So in a minute, he crawled out of the driver's window.
Then a
He
dog
got up
came
and
out.
got down, and then he got back up there, and the dog come out.
Yeah.
Then he crawled back in the car, and he come out with a shotgun.
So we just went on to town.
So I said, well, he's living. Let's get the heck out of here, because I ain't going back down there. He'd shoot me.
He rolled that thing, boy. That's all you can see.
But
Just
all
got
you
car
could see
rolling
was
out
that
there.
old. I think it was old.
Yeah, I think it was.
It was
What
really
he after
rolling.
you? What?
Well, he thought we'd make it funny of him, I guess.
I don't
But
know.
when he
was
cut
come off the road, and he was off the road on the other side.
When he cut across that pavement, he got a half-inch gash in that pavement all the way across from his wheel.
But he was going
That's how
fast.
sharp he was turning.
That-
His rim cut down in that pavement
That's what I
all the way
can't.
across that
I
road.
can't figure
know.
what went through his thinking mind. You know.
But oh yeah, it was. Oh, thank you.
But he sure rolled that car.
Yeah, he rolled it up in the ball. But
And when a man gets a shotgun, I ain't gonna go see what he wants.
no, we're not gonna go argue with him. You know, he just.
So we went on and got a load of gravel. Well,
She's
get-
sure trying.
just go ahead and get fat. I don't
She's
care.
trying to spoil me.
Get out of
Boogie,
there.
get
Get
away
out
from
of
there.
there, Boogie.
Now,
No,
Boogie, I'll get you for
Boogie,
that.
He just wants to.
Yeah, we had about $18 or $20, so we decided we'd take off and go someplace. So we went to Juarez, and this old boy had this 54 Ford, and so we went down there and stopped, went across the border for about 30 minutes, and then we came back out, and then we cut south, and we followed along the Rio Grande River just as close as we could. There's roads that, 100 miles from it sometimes it's 50 miles from it. And we went down to Del Rio, which was another boys' town down there. So we went across there, and so we stayed there 30, 45 minutes and came out. Well, we decided we'd go to Brownsville, way down on the tip of Texas, And so we went to Brownsville. We cut back up through Corpus Christi.
Del
And,
Rio.
and then gas was 10, 12, 15 cents a gallon, so we wasn't worried too much about gas, And we'd had a hamburger, and we went from Brownsville back up through Galveston and Corpus Christi and into Houston. From Houston we went to Dallas and Fort Worth. From Dallas and Fort Worth we went to Oklahoma City. From Oklahoma City we went to Colorado Springs. So we thought, well, we'll cut back. Now, all this, to keep in mind, we left Sunday morning about 10 o'clock. And we finally run out of money and run out of gas in Pueblo, Colorado, coming back. So this was the following day. This was Monday.
Yeah.
So we went into the service station and told this old boy, said, hey, we're out of gas, we're hungry. Let us work for you for long enough to fill up, get a tank of gas, get something to eat. So, boy, we all jumped in. Well, man, we was pumping gas. We was all greasing cars, doing anything, And then we had on our Sunday church clothes, But we was doing all this work, and he filled the car up with gas and gave us no money to buy a hamburger. Well, that gas got us on back into Odessa. But we went all that way, 1,600 miles. We left at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. We're back on 4 o'clock Monday afternoon. Now that's, we just switched off. We never stopped. We never shut that car off after we left Del Rio until we run out of gas.
Good.
Man.
But we used to go like that all. We used to travel like that all.
You can come up here.
But and one night we was going down there, old Jerry and I. In fact, this is the night I met my wife. We were sitting there at that drive-in in Odessa, and these two girls sitting in the car next to us. And so we decided we'd go to Juarez. Jerry and I did. And we decided we'd go to Juarez. So we had bought a fifth of vodka and a fifth of whiskey. So we met Sharon and Linda, her girlfriend, So we told them we was going to Juarez. So Linda said, well, why don't you just come over to my house instead? About like that. And I started saying, well, okay. And then we decided, no, we'd have more fun in Juarez.
Yeah.
So we decided we'd take off going to Juarez, So we got to Penwell out there, it's a little community there. And we was both about half drunk anyway.
Like that,
We were drinking pretty heavy anyway. And went to Barstow. And Barstow's 6 miles this side of Pecos, So Jerry said, well, it's my car. He said, I need to drive. I said, okay. So I let him drive from Barstow to Pecos 6 miles, and he was drunker than I was. And he said, well, maybe you better drive. So we stopped in Pecos and had a sandwich, a hamburger. And I left the city limits page, and I was doing about 120 miles an hour when I left the city limits. And boy, that little old car, it'd run 150 miles an hour, just like a button, He had it hopped and gilded, everything he could do to it. And it was getting dusty dark. We left Odessa about 5 o'clock, and this is the middle of summer, and it was getting dark by this time, because it's about 70 miles over to Pecos. And I wasn't paying any attention. I noticed this car up ahead of me on the road there, on the highway, Well, by the time I got close enough to see what it said Highway Patrol on the back of it. And I went around that old boy, and he had some loud pipes on that Ford anyway, a little 54 Ford. And he had some loud pipes, and boy, it just burnt the paint off the side of that car, and burnt the sins of hair off that old boy's arm. And he got after us. I guess he thought, well, old smart son of a gun, so I'm just going to catch him. But I had such a head start on him. Old Jerry looked back, he had said, he's gaining. Boy, and I'd put my foot in a little bit more and take another drink. He's gaining. Boy, here we go, And he chased us 12 miles east of El Paso, and I guess he run out of gas or something because he pulled off the road. But I don't know why he never radioed unless his radio was broken or something. But we went over to Juarez and stayed about 45 minutes and decided we better get out of there before they really come looking for us, So we got back in the car and we drove north to Albuquerque. And then we cut from Albuquerque to Amarillo, and then Amarillo back down to Lubbock, and then drove 600 miles out of our way to keep them going back down Highway 80 so that cop wouldn't get us.
Great.
You know, we just,
Crazy.
I hopped the 22. I had a 22, and we decided we'd go down to Cunha one night, and there's 4 of us, this same 4, and we decided we'd go down to Cunha, and I had my little 22 with me, and I hopped that 22 down at Big Lake for enough money to get a tank of gas. And so we went on, we made it on down to Cunha, and I kind of found out one of our boys had a little money that we didn't know about, so we took the money away from him, and that gave us enough money to get back home on, you know, and I was gonna stop by there and pick up my 22 when I went back through, but he was closed and couldn't find him, so I said, well, I'll come back and get it. Never did go back and get that 22. But anyway, boy, they'd had some rains, and those little old gullies down there, you know, the water'd run a foot or 2 across the thing. And we dropped off one of those little old hills, and there was a car stopped down there. And when we hit that water hole, the water running about a foot deep, I think we emptied it there for about 75 feet. But God, we all knocked our heads against the top of the house. It did like hit the brick wall, you know.
Yeah.
We all knocked our heads against the top of the car and everything else. We went on across, and that car saw we went across, so he is able to come across too, you know. That's the only thing that slowed us down. We were rolling, boy, I'll tell you what. But these old boys, you know, we had some good times.
So how did you meet your wife?
Huh? Well, I met her at that drive-in,
Oh.
you know. And then when I got back, well, I called her. And I happened to call her during dinner, and she said her daddy never would let her talk to anybody during dinner, you know. So I called 3 or 4 times while at dinner, and he wouldn't let me talk to her. So I decided, well, I'll just go over there. So I went to the door, and I knocked on the door, and he come to the door, and he said, honey, there's some bum here to see you. And that was the first word I ever said to that man, the first words he ever said to me. And so then you know, we got going together, and then I messed up because I came to Alaska and married old Sally. But then when I went back, after I left Sally up here, I went back and I started going with her again. And the night that Sally, the day that Sally and I got divorced, we got divorced at 5 o'clock, and 20 minutes after 9 that night we got married. And that was February 3rd, 1958. Been married ever since. Boy, we've had some tough time, but it's been a good one too, you know. But
So
yeah.
was he the only Whatley that ever went AWOL?
No,
Who else did?
No, he did.
well, no, I was out at the overseas replacement station, and they put me. I didn't have but 9 months to go in the Army. Now that's all I had left, and normally it's a year's duty to go to Korea and back. See, so they put me. We went up there one day, but the funny part of that, I was working in the sending these old boys over to Korea and Japan and this and that and the other. That's what I was doing, and I was going down the roster there one morning, and I saw this name that was familiar to me, and I said, surely that's not the same old boy. And there's no boy there, no doubt. He was kind of bully type old boy, you know, and he was always picking on the little guys and this and that and the other. And so I went up, sure enough, there's this old boy. See, I went to school with him. And so we shook hands, you know, and he asked me what I was doing. I told him, well, I was responsible partway for shipping these guys overseas and all this. And he said, well, you know, I've never been to Oakland. He said, boy, I sure would like to look around there. And I said, oh, I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, there's no problem. I said, I can pull you off of this roster. I said, I'd let you stay here 2 or 3 days and put you on another roster in a few days. And he said, boy, can you do that? I said, sure. I said, no problem. I said, just don't worry about it. I said, it's done. He went out on the next boat. I decided, well, I'm going to pay you back for all those little guys you bullied in high school. So he went out on the next ship for Korea.
Oh.
Oh.
But anyway, I went there one day. I went in and looked at the roster there that night, and there was my name. So I head out for Korea the next morning at 8:30. I said, devil this nonsense. I didn't have 9 months left. And I said, devil this nonsense. So I went in, I had dinner. Boy, I ate a big dinner. And I had $6. And so I came back from dinner. So I got out on the highway there, and I caught a few rides, you know, and I was down outside of Los Angeles. And here come an old boy over the hill, had a red and white Pontiac. And God, he was moving. So he saw me standing outside the side. This is about 4 o'clock in the morning now. And he saw me standing outside the side of the road, boy, and he locked off, four wheels to come sliding to a stop, backed up, and well, I run up and got in the car with him, you know, and all this other stuff. And so we took off, boy. He burned rubber, and here we went. Well, we got to talking and all this, and I told him I was AWOL and all this stuff, you know, and that I was going to Houston, need to get to Houston and all that. He said, well, I'm going that way, you know. I said, okay, boy, great, you know. So we got over another little town to get low on gas, and so he decided he's going to get some gas, and I said, okay. And so he pulled down there, and he didn't have a key. It had a lock and gas cap. He didn't have a key to the gas cap. He said, well, I lost my key to this gas tap. He said, I'm going to have to pry it off. And I said, okay, you know. So he got him a pry bar, and he was trying to pry this cap off. And I thought to myself, there's something haywire here, you know. Yeah. So I went in there, and I got the phone book down, and I opened the phone book up, and I was looking on, and I just pointed, you know, and I was reading. I got a piece of paper out and wrote down his phone number. You know, didn't have any idea who it was. It's just a phone number. So I went back out and told this old boy. I said, hey, I just happened to think that I had an old boy here I was in basic with, and I said he lives here in town. And I said I found his phone number in there, and I said I called him. And I said I'm gonna go see him. So I said I'm just gonna take a day off and go see him while I'm through here. Well, okay, he says. So I walked off out there in the pasture and just lay down out there in the pasture, see. And I watched him. He finally got that bar off that thing and got some few dollars worth of gas and took off. Well, I got back up out on the road and I was hitchhiking again. So I caught a couple of rides and I'd eaten a hamburger or something. I was down, didn't have much money left. Left there was $6 and 6 cigarettes is what I left open with. And I was smoking pretty heavy.
Cigarettes, 6 meals.
So anyway, I got a ride, several rides, and I finally made it to Blythe, California, where the customs is, coming from California into Arizona, see. So I was going through customs there, and this old boy was telling me that it's against the law to hitchhike in Arizona and all this other stuff. And I said, well, I'm just going right over here. I said, I got an aunt and uncle in Winters, Sis Bruce, which we did have. We had an aunt and uncle in Winters, and I said, I'm just going to Winters is all I'm going. You know, I'm going to visit my aunt and uncle. He said, well, okay then. He wouldn't say too much about it. Well, lo and behold, looked up, here come his Pontiac. And so that old boy locked down all 4 tires again, slid to a stop, and I got in. And he had another guy with him. And he said, well, I thought you was going to stay back here. I said, well, I called that old boy, and I said, his wife answered the phone, and I said, he's not there, won't be back for about a week. And I said, so I figured I better just go on, you know. So he accepted that, see, without questioning too much. So the more I listened to him and this other old boy talk, because he was running, boy, the more I listened to them talk, the more I decided I needed to get out of that car. So we come up a little wide spot in the road down there, about 10, 12 miles from Wyndham, you know, where Sis and Bruce live. And I told him, I said, well, I've got an aunt and uncle live back up here. And I said, they told me when I got here to call me and come down and get me. So I just had them let me outside the road. And I walked across the street, walked in this little place. And I said, oh, God, you got a telephone? She said, yeah. So I called Highway Patrol. And I said, I don't know whether it's true or not. I said, but I think you need to check something out. Because I still didn't like thieves, even then, you know. And I said, I think you better check something out. And I gave him a description of this car and the old boy. And so I hung up, had a cup of coffee, and I went back out. I was going to catch a ride on into Wyndham. Well, I was walking along the road there, and I saw this state trooper come down. And I was up on the hill about 3/4 mile from this little place down there and walking, you know. And I saw him, he turned in there, and he got out, and he went inside this little store. But he got back out, come back out in his car, and he pulled back up there and stopped me, and he said, are you the one that turned that car in on being stolen? I said, yes, sir. I said, I certainly am. And I said, I just had to get out of it. I said, I've got an aunt and uncle in Wyndham. And I gave him their name, and he happened to know them. And I gave him, and he said, well, I know where they live, you know. And he said, would you come down here and give me an identification on these two boys? I said, sure. And they had already made it all the way down past Wyndham there before they stopped them. And so he took me up there and he stopped about as far over here to the garage out there from them, you know, from the car. He said, is that two boys? And I said, yeah, that's the one that was driving there on the left and the other one was right. And I said, he just picked him up. I said, I don't think he had anything to do with stealing the car. I said, he just happened to be an accessory to the crime. I said, but I said, the other boys, I said, he picked me up at 4 o'clock in the morning outside of Los Angeles. And he said, well, we got a report to Redding, California, that this car is stolen. And he took me back to Wyndham, took me right up to Sis Bruce's front door. He said, now, he said, you know it's against the law to hitchhike in Arizona. I said, yes, sir. I said, I certainly do. And I said, you won't see me out here again. Well, he didn't, because I left about 2 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, but I went in and ate and got my belly full and cleaned up a little bit. And 2 o'clock in the morning, boy, I was back out on the road, and an old boy picked me up. And he wrote the movie Quo Vadis. If you ever saw that show, he said he was the guy, the screenwriter on the movie. And he had a Lincoln, and he had a typewriter mounted on a table built on the back of the front seat. And I said, what's that for? And he said, well, he said, every once in a while I'll get an idea. And he said, I'll just pull over the side of the road and write it down. He said, I want you to know, he said, you're the first person I picked up in 10 or 12 years. He said, last time I picked a hitchhiker up, he said, he knocked me in the head and robbed me. I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, I borrowed $10 from my grandmother back there in Wyndham. And I said, when I get out of this car, you'll have just as much money as you have and I got it. I said, I don't like a thief any more than like a rattlesnake. And he took me all the way. He said, can you drive? And I said, yeah. He said, let me see your driver's license. So I showed him a Texas driver's license. He said, well, I'm tired. He said, why don't you drive? He said, just drive through Phoenix and drive all the way out the other side. He said, well, you won't have to worry about getting through town. And he said, it won't be up. So I drove all the way through Phoenix, got out to city limits on the other side, and I woke him up, and we shook hands, and I thanked him for the ride, and he turned around and went back to Phoenix. And then I got in the car with 2 Mexicans. And I got in and sat down in old 49 Mercury, and I got in and sat down and didn't even have a back seat. It had a case of wine.
Oh.
And that's what I sat on back there. And it was 36 or 38 miles to Globe. And it's all through the mountains. And about every 3 minutes they'd say, hand us another bottle of wine. And I'd hand them another bottle of wine. They scared the life out of me. I lost 10 years of growth over those mountain times. And we got to Globe, and I got out of that car. I decided I didn't want any more of that. And there was one little old restaurant there, and it was open. And I went in and got me a cup of coffee. And I put sugar and cream in that coffee till 5 o'clock in the morning, trying to get warm, because it was cold as the devil out there on the desert. And I bet I drank a half a thing of sugar and a half thing of cream just putting in that coffee, you know, because I didn't have much money, and I wanted to get at least to El Paso to Dorothy's and Jerry's, you know. So next morning I got on the road, got me a ride, went on into El Paso, and I stopped at Dorothy's and Jerry's, spent the night there, and cleaned up, and borrowed $10 off them. I made it to Odessa. Mother and them lived in Odessa, so I made it there. And I got $10 off of Mother, and then I went on to Houston, you know. But I just made the stop every time. Every place had relatives. That's where I stopped. That's kind of like when I come up here. I broke down to Watson Lake over there on the Elkan Highway. And when I had that raccoon with me, and there was a little old garage out there. And I went in there and I asked that old boy. I told him what was the matter because the aeronautical engineer out of Boeing was on his way to Anchorage. And I was out there beside that old car and didn't know what was the matter with it. And he pulled the distributor out and he stuck his finger down in that distributor hole. And he said, you got a shear timing gear. You know, I said, oh, okay. You know, he knew more about it than I did. So he pulled me up there with a little old garage up there about 2 miles. And he said, well, let me pull you up. He said, he said, there's bound to be a garage up here someplace. So he pulled me about 2 miles from me run across this little garage there at Muncho Lake. And so he pulled me in there, and this guy came out, and all his kids came out, and I had that raccoon with me. He had 6 little kids. And my God, you think the world ended, and the sun rose and set with that raccoon, because that's where they were. They stayed around that raccoon. Of course, raccoons tame as could be. You know, they were petting and holding him and carrying him. And so we stripped that old car. We pulled the engine and tore that engine apart and found out all the parts we needed and made a list of them. and I was just running back and forth across the road, hitchhiking, either going to Dawson Creek or back to going to White Horse or back to Dawson Creek, you know. And so I got a ride going to White Horse. So I got in there on the Queen's birthday and everything closed. So I had to stay the night there in White Horse. And I went down to the dealership the next morning. They had all the parts we needed. So I got all the parts and went back out on the road and started hitchhiking. Well, I was gone 3 days doing that because it's 456 miles to White Horse, you know. So I got back in there.
Sounds like
And I'll bet there's 60 kids around that coon out there. I don't know where they came from. Boy, they came down to the woodworks, down out of the hill or what. But all these kids are just in the ring out there around that raccoon, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I stayed there, and we put that old motor back together, and the timing mark, we didn't know which timing mark was any good, and we put it back together 3 times before we got the right timing mark, you know. And put it all back together, and he gave me a place to sleep, fed me real good, you know, took care of my raccoon while I was gone, and he had a list of stuff to those long yellow sheets, you know, written down there. And I thought, my God, you know, how am I ever going to pay him? Boy, he added all that up, and I filled up the gas, and he added all that up and everything. He said, how about $36? Does that sound like too much? I said, $36? He said, no. So I gave him 50, you know.
Yeah.
So we shook hands all around, and the kids all told the raccoon bye, and I got in the car and left, you know. And every time I drove the Alcan 2 more times, and every time I'd go by there, I'd stop, let him tune up my vehicle, you know.
Yeah.
And then, boy, he made some good friends. And then when old Donald Terrace came up, you know, there a couple of summers, several years later, I told him, I said, you stop there at Moncho Lake, and you find, I said, you ask that old boy if he was there when that kid in that Chevrolet come by that raccoon. I said, and he said, yeah. He said, that old boy wondered where you were, you know.
Tell us the rest of the story about the raccoon, because I remember the raccoon as a child, but
Oh,
we
do
don't
you?
know the whole story about how that came to be, you know. Colonel Coon.
Well, I
It was
just,
Colonel Coon is what we call him.
yeah, I just had that raccoon, and I decided, well, you and Jeanette needed a pet. So I thought, well, I'll take that raccoon to him. So here we went, boy, we took off, and I had more fun with that thing. I got into Great Falls, Montana, and I pulled in a little drive-in there. And that old coon, he had a habit. He'd lay right on the back of my seat. He'd just put 2 legs on each side, just lay up there, and he had his head right up there at the window, see. And this little old fender lizard come out there, and a little car hop, and she bent down, you know, looked right in that window, and that raccoon is about that far from her. She jumped about 3 foot right straight up. My God, she had never seen a raccoon, you know. She didn't have any idea what that was. But after 3 days in that motel with me, she knew what a raccoon was. Cause boy, that was the best girl catcher I ever had with that raccoon. I had more fun with that raccoon than the girls than I ever had in my life, you know. But every place I went, I didn't have to worry about sleeping alone because there's always somebody that liked that raccoon, you know. They might not like me, but they like that raccoon, you know. But when I got here, everything, I had the little rubber grommets on all of those hinges, you know, on that convertible top. I didn't have a rubber grommet left. He chewed all of those off, you know, and everything. But then when we had him out there in front of the house, woke up out of that one night, boy, all the dogs was barking and everything else. And I woke up just in time to see Kenneth take his rifle down off the wall. I thought, what's going on? And he walked into the kitchen there, that little house. We had that raccoon out there, kind of out away from the house, in a cage. God, there's dogs all over the place out there. He never opened the window or anything. He just raised up and took aim, shot right through the window, the screen. Everybody in the house, you and Jeanette, faint on them, everybody in the house sat right straight up in the middle of the bed. But he got that dog. And he belonged to that old gal lived down there next to the river there. And she come up looking for a dog there. We never did see that dog. We took him down.
Drilled him right through the heart.
Right through the heart. And he run about 50 feet before he died. He didn't even know he was shot. He run about 50 feet before he killed over. Then we took him down and dropped him in the river.
So he was trying to get the raccoon.
Yeah, they was all trying to get the raccoon. But boy, they scattered after that. But they better be glad they didn't get it. I don't raccoon mean. A raccoon will drown a dog.
If you get him in the water, yeah.
Yeah, a raccoon will drown a dog because the dog will be up on the raccoon and the raccoon will go right up on top of that dog's head. And he'll push that dog underwater. He'll drown the dog every time in the water.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, oh yeah, and then you know he'd take off. one day some lady called me down there. She said, "Do you own this raccoon?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "You better come get this SOB." I went down there and you'd never believe the destruction that raccoon caused. He'd gotten in her back door and gotten in her kitchen. There was flour and sugar
Well, they
and
turn
beans
over everything,
and
move everything.
God, he had everything just spread out across the floor. It was all just mixed together, wet, paste, you know. She said, "If I ever see that raccoon down here again," she said, "I'm gonna kill him." I said, "You won't ever see him again, I'll guarantee you." But he'd take off, be gone 2 or 3 days, and then he'd come back, you know. It's strange. And then when I left, he was still living. I sold him that old boy some down at where? Some old boy come up and down someplace.
Well, the guy had another raccoon, and we let him have it, I think, and I think both of them finally got away.
Yeah, we had.
Or, I don't know where he-
We had them for a few years, didn't we?
Yeah, we had him for quite a while.
Yeah.
But I had the only raccoon, the second raccoon in Alaska. There was
That
one
was a
more.
glacier bear, we told
Yeah,
everybody
glacier
when we
bear.
go to town. We had an old cattle rack on that pickup. Now, he'd ride on that cattle rack.
Oh boy, yeah, but that raccoon, he was something else.
Yeah, he was.
But
Right,
I sure had a lot of fun with him.
Yeah, they're attraction.
I used to take it.
Tired, we're about out of battery.
Yeah.
I used to take it